Well, last night I sat in my recliner with a glass of wine in one hand and my crossword puzzles in the other, and I came across this crossword clue. 3-letter words, Sunday snoozing spot for some. The answer? A pew. I don't find that funny. However, I could see how that might happen when you approach the stewardship sermon. Typically, stewardship sermons are not the most engaging of sermons, and every preacher kind of begrudgingly preaches it. But it's an important topic in our life of faith. Well, as you see in a bulletin, this is our Stewardship Sunday, and yes, this is the Stewardship Sermon. However, I want to talk about stewardship this morning in a little bit different of a manner than normal. I want to place the topic of stewardship beside our reading from Joshua this morning. Joshua standing with Israel before the promised land, about to lead the people over the Jordan. I think that reading might have some good things to say to us as we think about what it means to go forward in stewardship. Could the boldness of crossing over the Jordan be a good model for us as we think about our life of faith and the call of stewardship? And so I want to invite you to pick up your pew Bibles and turn to Joshua chapter 3. That's in the first half in the Old Testament, around the 6th book of the Old Testament. Today's reading began, "The Lord said to Joshua, 'Today I will exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they may know I am with you, as I was with Moses.'" Joshua had assumed leadership. Moses, the guy who led the tribe of Israel through the desert for 40 years, he had died. And it is Joshua now who is called to lead the people. And he has this huge task before him. And that task probably seems quite daunting. Like Joshua's a young guy, there's probably not a whole lot of confidence in this young guy to lead the people. How can he replace Moses? They are separated from the promised land by water. How are they going to cross this Jordan? And to top it all off, the spies who had been sent into the promised land, they came back saying these people are giants and it is impossible for us to take the land. So let's stop here and let's not go forward. The hurdles that Israel had to overcome probably seemed insurmountable. We have hurdles to overcome. At our last annual meeting, we passed a budget that projected as a modest surplus in our finances. Our financial statement showed us running about $20,000 behind where we need to be at our last look. Right? So that's where we are right now. We're about $20,000 behind where we want to be. And so right now, it looks like that we are on course to end the year not with a modest surplus, but with a deficit, and quite not a small one at that. Now, obviously, the corporation and the treasurer are looking to see what we can do. There are various funds that we have which we might be able to move around to offset some of this picture. We're going to go again to the diocese and ask to not make any principal payments on the loan that we have with the diocese, and that will hopefully help us plan for next year. There is also the obvious requests for people to be up to date in their offerings. There's the appeal for people to be placed on direct deposit as a way to help, as a way to ensure this consistent offering. Or if people are in a financial place to make an extra donation, that would help a lot. But just like Israel didn't just face one obstacle in entering the promised land. It wasn't just the river they had to face. Neither are we only facing the financial shortfall. Obviously, there are economic things going on. People are still out of work. People find that their money now doesn't go as far as it used to. People's financial pictures change. The reality, though, is that we aren't just facing a lack of funds for this year's budget. The big hurdle that we are facing, and what our statistics over the past year has shown, is a general decline in our revenue based on a smaller congregation. Now, the interesting thing is we haven't had a lot of people leave the church. Right? Yes, there have been some deaths in the parish, but we have also had new people join the parish. But because of schedules, because of demands of life around them, because things change in people's health, attendance at church has become more and more infrequent over the past little while. Our parish roll hasn't changed that much numerically, but what has changed is the number of people that we see here on Sunday morning. And it leaves a simple reality. We don't have as many people coming to church anymore. And because of that, open offerings are down, pledged offerings are down, and we are not meeting our expenses. We, as a community, we need to address this trend that we are seeing. Because of our loan payments, the diocese, or because of our loan payments to the diocese and to the foundation, we are still having a higher demand on our budget as before, on a pretty lean budget. And as I said, we're going to go to the diocese and ask for just to only pay the interest, but still there's a higher demand because of our loan payments than normally. But even if that wasn't the case, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room in our budget. It's not like the council is frivolous in its spending. And so if this trend continues of our revenue not meeting our expenses, then little by little, all the funds in our bank will be used up. And then we will need to have a much more difficult conversation. So what do we do? Well, it would be easy for me to say, well, give more. Everybody here should pull out an extra $5 or an extra $10 from their wallets each week and put it in the plate. This will solve all our problems. But it won't. Because this year's budget shortfall is only one of the obstacles that we face. The way forward for us is to grow the congregation. The way forward is to have a higher Sunday attendance. Now, I want to say this. I fundamentally loathe the idea that we do evangelism only to pay our bills. It's not why we reach out to others. That's not why we invite people to church. That's not why we encourage those we haven't seen for a while to come back. Have you ever seen on television where two people are adrift at sea, they're lost at sea, they're dying of hunger and thirst, and they're looking at each other and all of a sudden the other person starts to look like a roast chicken? We should not look at the people around us and see dollar signs. The reason why we reach out to others is because we want to share the good news of Jesus. Because we want to share the love that we have experienced from God. We want to live that outward. We want to share that. We invite other people to come into this place, the church, because we feel that we have a special thing here. We have a special community. We have a special Lord. We have a special experience of God's presence, and we want others to experience it as well. That's why we do evangelism. We can't ignore a reality. And the reality is that growing a congregation is really the only way that we can reverse the financial and the numerical trend that we are seeing. And so as a congregation, this is what we need to focus on for the next little while. Now, for Joshua and for the Israelites, in the midst of seeming insurmountable obstacles, God's words came with assurance. It came with a declaration of power. It came with a call for them. By this you will know that among you is a living God, who without fail will drive out these people, who without fail will remove all obstacles. And I firmly believe that. I could spend the rest of the sermon emphatically thundering about God's goodness, about his providence, about his deliverance for us. I believe in the core of who I am that we are not an abandoned people, that God is leading this congregation and God will provide for us. But all of those words have absolutely no effect if we will not be a people who will act on that belief. For Israel, God declares to them his power. God declares that he will deliver them, that he will lead them. But then he calls the congregation to do something. God declares to them, select 12 men from every tribe, and when the soles of their feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters flowing from above shall be cut off. God had promised his presence. God had promised his power. God had promised his deliverance. But the people had to embody that reality. They had to embody the very future that God was pointing them to. The people had to step into the Jordan. They could not sit back and think, well, God's promised his power, so let's just wait and see what happens. No. They had to get their feet wet. We are called to live out the future we believe that God is calling us to. And if we believe that God calls us to a future that involves growing this congregation, we believe that God is calling us to be a place where people experience the depths of Jesus' love and we reach out of that love and invite others into it, then we need to live out that reality today. If we believe that the future of this parish involves increasing this active congregation, then we need to get our feet wet. We need to live out that reality today and tomorrow and the next day. This can't be something that just a few people take up. Just as our financial shortfall can't be placed on the backs of a few givers. Oh, well, they're more off. They're better off than I am. They can handle this. No, it has to involve all of us. And similarly, growing our congregation, reaching out to others, can't be left to the one or two individuals who, quote, are into that evangelism thing. No. We are a community. We bear each other's burdens. And together we bear the weight of this parish, this place we love, this place of blessing, this place of life, this place of transcendence. We bear this place in our hearts and we bear it on our shoulders. To be part of a community means that we don't get to say, that's really not my thing. So how will you get your feet wet? In our financial situation, what does that mean for you? But in our numerical trend that we are seeing, how can you get your feet wet? It could mean just calling somebody you haven't seen for a while. Calling them up and saying, I haven't seen you at church for a little while. I miss you. And invite them and encourage them to join you next Sunday. Maybe it's children. They've grown. They don't come to church anymore. Or they say they want to come to church, but it's easy to get into a routine where other things take precedence. So maybe give them a call and say, why don't you come with me? Or maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a neighbor. And all of that can be scary. But maybe getting your feet wet is not waiting for them to come to you. Right? Sometimes I think, we wait until somebody comes to us and says, I've been thinking about joining an Anglican church with a fabulous choir and a kooky priest who does magic tricks. Do you know a place? The reality is that conversation probably will never happen. Maybe God is calling us to take a step forward. Maybe getting your feet wet means that you are called to go to them with that conversation. To take a deep breath. Go to them. And invite them to church. A community that never reaches outside of itself to embrace the people around them is a community that will never grow. And that community faces a deeper problem, a bigger obstacle than just their annual budgets. Of course, for Joshua and for Israel, the people did get their feet wet. The waters did part, and God did provide faithful. And the same will be a reality for us. We will get through this. God will prove faithful, and God will prove powerful. But now that we know our obstacles, now that we know what we face, and now that we know what is called for us, let us embrace the future that God leads us to. Let us get our feet wet. Let us invite others to experience this vibrant, this growing congregation. Amen.